here that there are really 4 things that we want to accomplish during our time with you within this hour. We're going to talk a little bit about cultural intelligence and study abroad and that relationship. We're going to introduce you to MyCQ for study abroad, a new e-learning program that's just been launched that we think can be a phenomenal supplement to the work that you are doing in your study abroad programs within your universities. And then we're going to actually show you a very short demo so you can actually see and feel what MyCQ study abroad looks like. And then we're actually going to give you the opportunity after the webinar to test it out on your own if you are interested. And then lastly, we will open the floor up for questions. And as Keela suggested, while we're talking and presenting the information, feel free to type in questions as they come to your mind. And then we'll be sure to come back around to that towards the final part of the webinar and try and address as many of those as possible. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. Before I start talking a bit about CQ and the relationship between that and study abroad, we thought we'd do a poll and we'd be very interested in sort of hearing your experiences as it relates to your study abroad programs. And so you should be able to see up on the screen a question. And the question is this: on a scale of 1 being completely ineffective to 5 being very effective, how effective is your institution in preparing students for their study abroad experiences? So how do you perceive your institution in terms of their efforts around making sure that students are actually prepared for those experiences? So if you don't mind, take a few moments and answer this poll, and we're curious to see what the results will look like.
We're getting in some results. If you have a couple of seconds here to vote.
Okay, interesting breakdown. So I'm assuming you can see the screen. So only about 5% of you suggest that your institutions are completely ineffective, whereas the majority of you fall in that somewhat ineffective or neither effective or ineffective. And then you've got 20% that suggest that you are that your institutions are very effective. So that's an interesting mix. And that's really the experiences that we observe as we are working with hundreds of universities across the globe and sort of getting a nice sneak peek into their study abroad program. So interesting diversity here, and we'll talk more about how to manage that depending on where you are on that continuum. You'll see here on this next slide, this really sort of matches up. If you go to the next slide, this matches up with those of you that highlighted that your institutions are either completely ineffective or somewhat ineffective, or you don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. You'll see the stat here. This was a study that was done a few years back by the Institute of International Education, and the question was asked to students: how well does your university, does your institution prepare you when it comes to going abroad? And you can see here the results of that study suggested that only 1/4 or 25% of U.S. students studying abroad said that they were provided with cross-cultural pre-departure training. That's only 1/4, so that means 75% of those students that are going abroad are feeling like they were not necessarily prepared. And we know that there are limitations to that. Although this is a U.S.-based study, I would dare suggest that the statistics may not be too far off when we look across the globe. We know that study abroad programs as a whole are continuing to rise, so it's not a question of whether or not students are going abroad. I think universities are working very hard to beef up their programs and to send as many students as possible abroad. But the question then goes back to how well are they doing in terms of preparing them for those experiences and allowing those experiences to really position students to learn as much as possible and develop their cultural intelligence while on that experience. So that's the one thing we want to talk about today. And as we talk about cultural intelligence, I want to just talk and explain what we mean by cultural intelligence, or CQ. So we'll go to the next slide. So cultural intelligence, as you can see on the screen, or CQ for short, is the ability to relate and work effectively with people from different nationalities, ethnicities, age groups, and many, many other diverse characteristics. A couple of key words in that definition, one being ability, meaning it is a skill. So it goes beyond the idea of just being sensitive to cultural differences or being aware of cultural differences, but it actually means that it is a set of skills that you can develop that will guarantee your effectiveness when interacting across cultures. So when we think about the role that cultural intelligence plays with students and preparing them to work across cultures, the idea is that students that have high cultural intelligence, it then enhances their ability to work and relate effectively with people that they are engaging with in those cultures and communities that they are spending time in. So with that, I want to transition and pass it over to my colleague, Dr. Lynn Van Dyne, and she's going to talk more specifically about the relationship between cultural intelligence and study abroad. And then we'll all be available at the end to answer any specific questions that you might have. So Dr. Van Dyne, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sandra. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Great. Well, I wanted to just start by welcoming all of the participants and saying how excited we all are to have this opportunity to talk to you about ways that you can use cultural intelligence to enhance the learning experience of your students who participate in study abroad. In terms of my background, I'm a researcher, and I was involved in the original development and validation of the cultural intelligence scale. And one of the things that makes me most proud of our work is that we have peer-reviewed predictive validity evidence that CQ makes a difference. And that's unlike many of the rival measures of cultural competence. And we want to say that there are things you can do as a facilitator of study abroad programs to make it more likely that your students will not view study abroad as a trip, a fun trip, or a vacation, but instead have a wonderful learning experience. And the trick to getting that to be more of a learning experience is structuring the study abroad program so that they prepare beforehand, they have specific goals they work on during their time abroad, and then at the end that they reflect deeply on the experience and try and figure out how can they apply what they've learned, not only in the next day or two, but for the rest of their life. So if I could have the next slide, please. What we've done here is we've taken the fundamental research on cultural intelligence and put together an e-learning course that is new and exciting because it's full of very concrete examples, exercises, and practical application. So the first few modules help students go through step-by-step learning about cultural intelligence, learning about 10 different cultural values, reflecting on their own feedback on their own cultural values, and how their cultural values compare to the typical cultural values of their destination. They then do some thinking and planning about how they could think of modifying their behavior in small ways so that they would be less likely to offend locals and more likely to have positive interactions. So we're not trying to change anybody's cultural values, but we are trying to get them to think about ways they can change their behavior so that they're more acceptable to someone who has a different set of cultural values. In addition, while they're spending their time abroad, we help them to write two very specific goals. And the first goal is, how am I going to use my CQ strengths during my time abroad? And the second goal is, how am I going to set particular targeted activities for things I can do that will help me to enhance my weaker CQ capabilities. And you as an instructor or a facilitator can actually make this an assignment that's worth points towards successful completion of the program, and that will help them to be more motivated to set these goals, share their progress with peers, and actually come out with better understanding of their culture. And finally, the last step is reflection. We know that most people finish study abroad and immediately jump back into their old life, and they don't take the time to reflect on what they learned. And without that reflection, they're less likely to have what they learned go into long-term memory. So we have a reflection assignment that we proposed. You can use it or not as you choose. That's designed to reinforce the long-term benefits of what they learned during their study abroad experience. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, what's the content of the course? First of all, it's full of tremendous variety. I used one of our other e-learning courses in my class this past spring, and my students said, wow, this is so much more fun than reading a traditional textbook. And I come to class knowing the basics. I don't have to sit here in class and listen to you lecture. So the whole idea is by using vivid examples, stories, listening to interviews with other students who've participated in study abroad, completing some application exercises, and then checking their learning with some quizzes that they can take over and over until they get them right, that they actually are more likely to internalize the information, and then when they're abroad, they can apply it. So, student engagement, one of the reasons why many study abroad programs do not succeed is that the students interact with each other, they don't reach out and interact with locals, and they're not truly engaged. So one of our objectives is to give you tools to help you make sure that they're using the materials, they've got assignments with points, so that there are deliverables that make sure they're engaged and they are learning. So next slide, please. As an instructor, I'm always looking for novel ideas about ways I can present material and enhance the level of engagement of my students. So one of the things that worked very well in my class was by using the online learning materials, I didn't have my students buy a more traditional textbook. Instead, I assigned them one module for each class as homework, and the system told me whether or not they had completed the modules. I could see whether or not they're tracking, and when we came to class, what we did was apply what they had learned. We would talk about it. We did a lot of experiential learning exercises, and in fact, in many cases, they were not even in the classroom because they were out in the real world applying some of the learning points. For example, we did role plays. They practiced doing interviews with someone from a different culture. Then they went out and they actually did the interview, trying to flex their behavior so that they were more similar in small ways to the typical cultural values of that destination culture. Frankly, for me and for my students, the more interactive class time was a lot more fun, and I'm absolutely convinced that they learned more because they were more engaged. We have posted online a lot of different ideas for how you might want to structure a class where you are using MyCQ for study abroad, ideas for syllabuses, a number of different types of assignments, and we tried to position it as a smorgasbord where you could get ideas for things you might want to do, or you could modify them in a way that would better fit the way you prefer to do this. In addition, the class is structured so that by picking and choosing the ideas that are options in the syllabus, you can tailor the materials to work for an entire semester, a quarter, or an even shorter term study abroad experience. Now, you could set up some workshops if it's simply not a long program, and they could get together before departure. They could have assignments to do while abroad, and then they could do the reflection exercise. So we're not trying to tell you what to do, but we are trying to give you some options for things that could be done. We're not only interested in benefiting the instructors, but bottom line, we really want to benefit the students. So could I have the next slide, please? Okay, benefits to students. What we're really trying to do is help them learn and not just view this as a vacation, go out and drink beer with their friends, but truly engage with the local culture. So the fact that the interactive homework is focused specifically on the experiences of other students, at least according to my students, they found it much more engaging, and they enjoyed the interactive customization of, for example, you know, here are my CQ scores, here are my cultural values feedback. How am I going to think about applying those in a particular destination culture? And they have opportunities to reflect on this, they make notes, and in the long run, they end up coming up with a development plan and specific reminders of behaviors they want to be sure that they do. The course includes a lot of concrete examples, things that should trigger them to think about, oh, I could do that, or gee, that's something I definitely do not want to do. Another way that we make it specific and unique to the student is if each student has written their own 2 CQ goals, using their strengths, enhancing their weaker CQ capabilities. There are many different ways that you can put together class exercises where they share their goals with each other, learn from each other, and learn to help each other in working toward their goals. Finally, back to the research, the MyCQ for Study Abroad program includes 2 assessments of cultural intelligence. There's one that occurs before departure, and each student gets their own personal feedback report, gives them their cultural intelligence scores, and allows them to compare their scores with the worldwide norms. So they find out if they're in the low end of the worldwide norms, if they're in the middle 50%, or if they're in the top 25%. This gives them a comparison that says, oh, compared to how other people see themselves, here's how I see myself. And interestingly, for study abroad, I sometimes see people who rate themselves very highly before departure. And what they find out during their time abroad is, oh my goodness, it's a lot more difficult than I realized. Maybe I'm not as flexible. Maybe I'm not as motivated. Maybe I'm not as knowledgeable. So what that means is that at T2, it's possible that their cultural intelligence scores could go down, and that's okay. It's information. It's not a contest to see if you can get the highest score possible, but what we're trying to do is help them to think about what are my capabilities, and given this information, how can I use my strengths? We all have some weaker CQ capabilities, so what can I do to work on enhancing my weakest CQ capability? So when they come back, they do another CQ assessment. They get a second feedback report that actually graphs for them their capabilities at time 1 compared to time 2, and it indicates whether or not a change is significant. So it's not just a presence of a change, but wow, here's something that should gather your attention. Why did your score go up? Or why did it go down? So, next slide, please. Because it's an e-learning course, it's online, available 24/7. Students can go through it at their own pace, their own time, their own place. They like that. In addition, it works technically on computers, tablets, or phones. The manner in which I used e-learning was part of a blended class where we had regular face-to-face classes, and they did this online learning beforehand. There are many different ways you could put it together. Finally, the content, students tell me it's relevant, it's practical, they love the vivid examples, the stories, the videos, and the interviews. So I hope in closing, that each of you takes full advantage of our limited time opportunity to take the course yourself and see for yourself at no cost how it works and get your own reaction to it. So now I'll turn it back to Craig, and he will show you a demo of the e-learning course. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. This is Craig again, and I want to begin by showing you a little bit about how you get to the course, how it works. We've tried to make this very simple. Lynn did a great job of explaining the course and what we've hoped for, but some e-learning, it feels like you're just sort of watching a slideshow, and we have done so much more than that in this course. There's an ample opportunity for your students to interact with the course, watch videos, see those testimonials from other students, and it is really quite engaging as you go through it. So I want to just share with you some of the highlights of it, and then as Lynn mentioned, you will have the opportunity to take a demo version of the course following this presentation if you choose. So some of the screens, what we talk to is really adaptive, which means the course adapts itself to the individual student. So in this particular slide, you're seeing, where am I going? Where is my destination? And then based on what the student selects as their destination, we can custom fit tips and advice based on the cultural cluster of their destination. So some of the tips that you would see in the course, tips for interacting with different people, tips for engaging in the culture, using the subway, eating the food, going through public transportation. We have a lot of student videos and audios and stories throughout the course that are very engaging, seeing how your peers reacted and what their experiences were. This is a little bit of housekeeping, but I want all of you to understand really how kind of simple it is to administer this program. When you go to our portal, if you're setting up the program, you simply give the program a name and set that up. Lynn mentioned an awful lot about Instructor Resources, and you can see in the center of this slide, highlighted by number 2, just a list of the resources that are available to you. So articles and presentations, sample syllabus, and then down in number 3, we have a number of videos that supplement the learning. So again, very engaging content that you can use when you're setting this up. Number 4 here shows the program options. You have the ability to invite your students or resend them to remind them. You can view the learning statistics, who's done what and how far along are they. And all of that is available to you as the administrator of the program. So some of the resources just pictured here give you an idea of what they will look like. So the tracking data down there on the lower right, one of the student testimonials, a couple of the discussion guides. And then this last one is a copy of the email that your students would get when you invite them to participate in the study abroad course. Simple email with a link. The first thing they do is go in and take their assessment. And then once they have completed that assessment, they would go into their own personal dashboard, and you can see the big green button, go to the e-learning. So it is very simple for them to find and simple for them to access. And the e-learning itself is engaged, or I'm sorry, is connected to their assessment results. So what you're seeing here is really a snapshot of what a student's screen would look like while they're in the e-learning. And you'll notice the green tab, it says close on it right now, but that allows the student to click and pull over their assessment results and feedback during the course. So as they're going through, if they wonder, gee, what was my area of strength? What was my area of weakness? Then that interactivity is available to them, and it's connected right to the course. All right, the course consists of 14 modules. And all of these modules are quite short. I don't think there's any of them that would be longer than perhaps 20 to 30 minutes, but most of them come in at about 10 to 15 minutes. And we begin with the overviews and introductions. It does contain the full content of our cultural value training and also of our MyCQ or cultural intelligence training. In addition, how to apply those concepts to a study abroad program. One of the nicest things, and I'll demonstrate this in a minute, is the development plan. So every student that takes this course comes away with a development plan of ideas and items to work on. They can do that prior to making their visit. The T2 section would be something that they do after they take their visit. So as Lynn mentioned, they would retake the assessment and you'd have that opportunity to compare their T1 and their T2 assessments. So I'm going to open up the course now. You'll see a little bit of how it interacts. Give it just a second to think its way through. And the course is running here. So within the course, we do have narration. There would be a voice talking to them right now. Lucky you, you get my voice, but that's because we're on the webinar. In actuality, they would have a professional narrator talking them through this course, talking them through the learning objectives of each of these modules, and leading them as they go. And there's videos in there. You can see a video playing. And I know it's a little bit lag time, so I'm going to let it catch up here. And then each module will have a quiz at the end of it. You should see that pop up here in just a moment. And these quizzes allow students to go through and take them up until the point where they have passed it. So we can simply go through these quizzes. Students go through and submit their answers. They'll get feedback as they go along. I want to take you into another one of the units. In this particular unit, we're going to apply the cultural values to the study abroad experience. And as we saw, the students have the opportunity to select the region or destination they are going to. So as I click on these, you'll see the areas on the map highlight. And if I'm a student and I'm going to an Arab country, I can simply type in there the destination. And it custom fits that to my destination. So we see the cultural values of that destination, and we are given the ability to select our own similarities to that destination. And I'm just going to select 3 of these and drag them across here for now. But we're then given specific feedback on the 3 similarities that match that destination. So again, it has a very customized feel to it for the students as they're going through this particular course. And then again, tips and tricks for taking advantage of it. When we look at this, we'll see some similarities. And the students can think to themselves, go through here. When they select one, they're given immediate feedback, whether that was an effective means or not an effective means. And that's how they'll go through that. And then the last area that I want to share with you is, like I mentioned earlier, the development plan. I think this is one of those strongest points of the course. It allows the students to create their own plan of action for after taking the course. So as we go through this, we can select the areas that we want to work on. I'm going to select cooperative, neutral, and high uncertainty of weights. So these are areas that are the most different from my destination culture, potentially areas that it would be the biggest challenge for me. And the course gives me specific recommendations for how to approach this based on those differences. As we continue here, we can take a look at some of the similarities that we had. And continue building my capabilities. I would identify my strongest CQ capabilities. Perhaps I have a high drive, but a low level of knowledge. So again, this is very personalized to the individual students. We set up our goals based on the training that we've taken so far. And continue on. A second set of goals. Again, in the student's own words, they're telling it. And what the result of this unit is their own personalized action plan, as you're seeing here. You can see it's consolidated all of the information from the fields that I filled in throughout that activity, along with the specific action steps that are recommended based on my own strengths and weaknesses. And of course, they are also able to print that. So at the point that they are at the end, they can print that out and have a piece they can actually take with them to use as a resource when they're abroad. So their action plan unit is right there. And I'm going to go ahead and proceed to the next. And at this point, I would like to open it up for questions. We have about 15 minutes, so we should be able to take a good number of questions. Just to remind you, if you have the toolbars from the webinar along the right, and you expand those, or they're expanded, you should have a section called Questions. And in those question boxes, you will be able to type a question, and we'll take as many as we can take in the next few minutes before we close up. And we have a number of them that have already come in.
Okay, great. So this is Sandra jumping back into the conversation. So I'm going to filter the questions, and depending on who would be the appropriate person to answer them, that's who will do it. So the first question is, can non-certified individuals have access to the free sample? And the answer to that question is yes. So as Craig suggested at the beginning, and Lynn also referenced this, but at the end of this, we're going to give you information on how to access the beta version of the e-learning, so everyone that's on the call can check it out, and we would really welcome your feedback on that. So yes, you can access that. All right, another question here. What are measures for cultural intelligence? So I can't answer that question, but I'm not going to. I'm going to pass that on to Dr. Van Dyne, our lead researcher, and have her respond to that question. So what are measures for cultural intelligence?
Thank you, Sandra. I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but we have published a validated 20-item short measure of cultural intelligence. We also have a longer measure of cultural intelligence that shows subdimensions for each of the 4 major factors. Going beyond that, there are other measures of cultural competence that have been advanced by a variety of researchers around the world. One of the resources on the web page under the Instructor Resources is the Sherm, S-H-R-M report. And if you look at that report, on page 9, Table 2 lists a number of the different assessments that are available, and it talks about the importance of knowing what it is you want to measure and why, and then picking a measure that fits your objectives. So we're not saying that all the other measures are bad, but we're saying that some measures are good for some things. Cultural intelligence is ideally suited for measuring capabilities, things that are malleable, things that can be changed by reading, by talking to other people, by studying abroad, things like that. So CQ is not something that you're born with, like personality. It's not something that's usually very stable, like your cultural values. But one thing that I, as an educator, I'm especially interested in is that CQ can be changed. And I, as an instructor, can help students enhance their cultural intelligence. And we have proven, published research that shows the outcomes of cultural intelligence.
Thank you, Lynn. And as a follow-up question to what you just shared, how long is the CQ assessment, meaning how many items?
The original measure was 20 items. The expanded CQS, or the eCQS, is 39 items.
Great, thank you. Another question, can I also have colleagues that are not certified do the on-site overview? When you say on-site overview, if you're referring to debriefing the assessment, the answer is yes, and what we would recommend is that you consider purchasing our educator resource kit, so even if the person is not certified, they can at least have that resource kit, which includes a guide that walks them through step-by-step strategies, or not strategies, but step-by-step action steps in terms of helping others understand how to interpret their CQ results. So yes. Another question, has this been used for international students coming to the U.S.? Yes. So we know that global mobility works in all directions, people coming from the east to the west, going from the west to the east. So it is appropriate and relevant to students studying in any part of the world. Another question, will this presentation be made available to the audience? Absolutely yes, it has been recorded, and it will be shared with those of you that are listening. In addition, Tambra Johnson, who is our education resource specialist, will also be reaching out to all of you just to see if you had any follow-up questions or needed any additional assistance. Another question, I'm going to pass this on to Keela, but it's around cost. So how much does it cost per student, per use?
The cost per student to take this assessment and related e-learning is $89 per student, which is just a little bit less than a traditional textbook may cost.
Thank you, Keela. Another question is the course in various languages? And I'll let you tackle that one as well, Keela.
The current study abroad course is, right now, it's only available in English. However, we are looking to translate a portion of the course, which is the MyCQ specific portion of it, into other languages. We have a number of languages of the assessment available, and so the goal would be then to translate our various e-learnings to go with those assessments.
Great. Another question here. Is it also effective for short-term study abroad programs? So, for example, a program that may only be 10 to 14 days, and I will take that one, Miranda. The answer is yes. So it's more about quality than quantity. So, you know, again, the whole idea of preparing students ahead of time, giving them resources to think about having an effective experience while they're there, and then what happens afterwards. So whether it's 10 days, you know, or a semester or a full year, it's all about, you know, those intervention strategies and how you prepare them. So the MyCQ study abroad would be a perfect supplement for that. So the answer is yes. Another question.
Sandra, if I can jump in?
Yes, Lynn, go ahead.
One of the really nice things about the flexibility of the CQ for study abroad is that if you have a short trip, if the time abroad is relatively short, usually students sign up for study abroad well in advance of the time of departure. So it would be entirely possible to have them complete the pre-departure modules before you even get together and start working as a group. And then while they're abroad, apply the two goals to use your strengths and enhance your weaker CQ capabilities. So depending on when you know who's going on your particular program, you could supplement their experience greatly by having them individually go through the different modules as preparation for their time abroad. And what that means is they'd much more likely be engaged and not just touring the highlights as a tourist. Thanks.
Thank you, Lynn. One more question. Do you find it to be more effective to be country, context, culturally specific, or rather talking about general cultural competency? Lynn, would you like to share your thoughts on that? I've got a few as well, but.
Sure, and you can jump in after I'm done. One of the key characteristics of all of our research on cultural intelligence is the emphasis on diversity within culture. The United States is very diverse. India is extremely diverse. China is very diverse. And so we think it's damaging, dangerous, and inappropriate to focus only on one set of cultural values for a particular culture. Instead, we're functioning at the individual level and saying that each of us, when we meet someone new, needs to try and diagnose, use our metacognition to figure out, oh, where's this person from? What might their typical cultural values be? And then observe the cues that they give off to find out whether or not your first guess is accurate or inaccurate. So we never talk about, oh, specifically CQ for everybody, I'm going to Argentina, they're all going to be the same. No, everybody in Argentina is not the same, just as everybody here is not the same. So we are not trying to prepare people to go to one place only. What we're trying to do is give them a set of flexible capabilities where they can adapt to whatever's going on in a situation that more likely than not is culturally diverse.
And
Sandra,
you covered my point. No, you covered my points exactly. The whole idea of having that balance of focusing on getting to know the individual, but as a starting point, beginning to understand some differences that may show up culturally speaking. So that was exactly what I was going to say. So thank you. It looks like we have answered all of the questions. We do still have a few moments. So if there are other questions, feel free. We'll pause for a moment, and you can feel free to add those.
Sandra?
Yes.
While we're waiting, I would like to just mention to everybody who's still on, we know that we've said a couple of times that we have free access for anybody that wants to, and we had one participant ask if colleagues could access the course. And so we've answered yes, and I would like to make a note that we are encouraging as many people as you can find to take the assessment for free and the e-learning for free, whether that's a colleague, whether that's a friend, whether that's a student that you may have. The course is currently in beta format, so we're looking for people to give us feedback. So please feel free to extend this offer to others, and we'll make sure that happens.
Thank you, Keela. And I would just add to that and emphasize, I know we mostly have staff and faculty and administrators on the call or on the webinar, but we really would like to get this in the hands of students and get their feedback, because ultimately they are the ones that will be taking advantage of it. So we would encourage you to share it with your students. And again, Tambra is going to be available for follow-up to really just get your feedback, so that if there are any enhancements that need to be made, we want to do that, and we want to do it from a student perspective. We do have one other question here. How have universities utilized this, and is it a course for credit? Great question. So the first one is yes. So you heard Dr. Van Dyne talk throughout her portion of the presentation how she has used MyCQ. The study abroad is new, so that part has not been used yet, but how she has used MyCQ in her course as part of a blended model, and how very successful that was, and the feedback from students was overwhelmingly positive. So yes, we've been using MyCQ, and we have a number of other universities that are looking at it now, and I know there's another department at Michigan State University, for example, in the EMBA program that's using MyCQ. So yes, they are beginning to use it, and so far we're getting very positive results and reviews. Is it a course for credit? Right now, it is not. Now, it can be added into a course, and I believe, again, Dr. Van Dyne shared how she has built it into her course and attached assignments and points to that, so that's definitely possible. We are looking on our end here at the Cultural Intelligence Center. We're definitely exploring all kinds of possibilities, including, what this could look like as part of a course, and maybe even at some point as part of a certificate program. But we are in the early conversations of exploring all of the possibilities that we think an e-learning course like this can offer and benefit our university partners. A few more questions, and we're going to watch our time here. We've got 4 minutes. Would the course be appropriate for high school students? Fantastic question. Lynn or Keela, would you like to respond to that?
It shouldn't make any difference as long as, the person can read and is engaged in the course. The material, I would think, is equally accessible to high school students as college students, executive MBA students, and working adults.
And if you are in a situation where you are in partnership with a K through 12 or secondary education school, and you've got access to high school students, again, we would encourage you to have them test it out and give us some feedback around that. How do we get access for the trial? So again, you're going to see, I think, on the next screen some contact information. But again, Tambra Johnson will be reaching out to all of you, likely today, to follow up and answer any questions that you have, and again, give you access to the course. There she is. So I think at this point we have 3 minutes left. So if there are other questions, I think there's one here. Is it difficult to require this when it's not connected to credit? That's a good question. I know, Lynn, again, I mentioned you, and you shared earlier that you did attach it to a course and attached assignments to it, but you've not done it where it's been a requirement and then they've not gotten credit. So I'm not sure what your thoughts might be on that.
I guess that you could, as a facilitator or as an instructor, say that you need to successfully complete the study abroad program and set whatever requirements you think would be appropriate, which presumably could include successful completion of the MyCQ for study abroad.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that I think most students, when I look at the work that we do with a number of our partners, and we work with many, I think students, the more information and resources that they can be provided to help them prepare and feel less anxious and more confident about that experience, I think the better. So, you know, you saw the survey that I shared earlier about the fact that only 25% of U.S. students say that they were adequately prepared to study abroad. So I think the more we can increase that number, whether it's attached to credit or just as a resource and support to students, I think that's going to be a win-win. So,
Sandra?
okay, it is, yes.
Just one quick final point. As part of our testing, we've had some students who previously completed study abroad complete the e-learning course, and uniformly every one of them said, gee, I did this because I was interested, it wasn't for a class, it wasn't for credit. I wish I'd had the opportunity to do this before I went abroad, but what I learned is the next time I'm traveling, the next time I need to go abroad for work, I will definitely do some things different.
That's great. Well, again, we want to thank you all for taking time to join us for the webinar. We hope that you have found the information to be useful and interesting. We apologize for the technology challenges that we had at the beginning, but hopefully you were able to hear most of the webinar. And again, anything that you may have missed, you will be able to listen to in the recorded version. And again, Sandra will be following up with you to answer any additional questions that you might have. So thank you again, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.